So one of these habits that I have, even though I'm of the generation that's sort of used instant messenger, you know, for forever since college and stuff, is I still have this habit that I consider mostly existing for older people who aren't part of that generation, which is I end almost all of my messages as sentences. So I still put like period at the end of stuff when I send it. And it's just, it weirds me out. That's like a habit I have, but nobody else I know, and none of my friends have ever developed that habit. I'm like, sending you a sentence. What?
Yeah. Hopefully.
It's just weird that way. All right. Hey, we got some people here. So, yeah, I don't know how much React we're actually going to look at tonight directly as React. Because I want to spend most of it just making sure, and maybe we'll fast forward a little bit if people are already comfortable with this, but who feels comfortable or familiar with the concept of like web routing, how you get to different sites on a page or different portions of a page or any of that?
I mean, like links.
Yeah, and sort of. Yeah, a little bit. Not that part. Not that layer. That's too deep. I'm talking about like the URL changes and how that type of stuff works. A little bit.
Yeah.
All right. So that's what we're really going to talk about today, and we'll do some hands-on examples, and then I can also talk a little bit about what tools there are in React to manage some of this. But I wanted to start with something really old instead of starting with something new with React, because routing has become a bigger problem more recently. It used to be something that was much, in a sense, like clearer what it did and how it worked. So I'm even going to just I'm going to get rid of this for now. And I pulled up an ancient website that hasn't changed since it was first posted in 1996 and still renders the same in browsers, which just shows you how incredibly stable browsers are, that they can render the same page. It's sort of notorious for being that way, that it's still up there. So it's the Space Jam website. And the start of routing and conversation here is that what you have up here, right, is your URL. That's the address that you use to go to a page. And it's broken up into different portions of it. And we're not going to break down all of this and how the internet figures out how to get to different destinations. But you could, the long or short of it is that basically everything, this portion here is just telling you what protocol, how do I talk? So you can think of that as saying what language, right? Oh, we talk using English. Oh, okay, I'll use English, And this one's just saying I use the secure version of HTTP. So that's where the S came from. The rest of this here is basically saying, if you were comparing it to an actual address or something, a lot of people compare this to mailing stuff. So this portion is like the address of a house or the an actual physical location. So that's essentially what that would be like. And so that designates the site that you're going to. And then after you've gotten past the site portion, you have all of the, I guess, I don't know what exactly this portion is called, but all of the local routing within the site itself. So all of this would be, if you have mail, right, you've got somebody's name on it usually. And so the post office doesn't care whose name is on that mail. They just care about the address and they deliver it. And then you get it in and, let's say you're in a place, I don't know, we're going to make it crazy, right? You've got like 20 family members there. And so you're trying to figure out who's got what. So it's like, all right, this goes to this person and this person. So that's sort of what this is doing, is this is the routing within the site itself. So that portion of the routing has always had to be managed by whatever site you're on. But traditionally, the way that works, and I'll pull up this other side again and show something different, is what happens. Oh, hold on, I want it to preserve the log. Actually, I'm not even going to preserve it at first. I'm going to leave it off. So traditionally, what happens is whenever you click on or you go to a route, so I'm going to go back real fast. You see that sort of cleared out. So if I'm hovering over this. You can see down at the bottom of the page, and you can't see it on the TV here. Maybe I need to make this a little smaller. But let's see if I can get all this fitting on there. I don't know if it's going to work. We'll try. Hold on. Get rid of that. All right, let's see if we can see it now. There we go. So you can see down here, that's sort of previewing where this is, the route. And that's the same thing that's going to show up here in the URL, the address bar, is our site didn't change because we didn't go to a different location on the internet as a whole. So essentially it went to the same server, the same location. But after that, something changed. So I'll go back real fast and we'll see what we had. It was archive Space Jam movie jam.html. And this new one is archive Space Jam movie CMP b-ball frames.html. And the way that works is traditionally is each server has code that's, oh, you requested this path. I know what files to serve up for that path, which is really, pretty simple thing to do. It serves it up. If we went over here and looked at the response, we'll see all the HTML essentially being served up. So that's really all of the markup. And then there's all of the other little bits that it also loads for other portions of the page. So traditionally, routing has been a concern of the server, right? Where usually what you do is you go to a web page, and when you navigate around, you make another request to the server to fetch the resources at that location. And that's usually what happens when you're changing routes up here. So every time that we do that, we're actually going to be changing you can see that it even refreshed. That's why I left that on, was that checked or unchecked for preserve log is every time we navigate around to somewhere else on this page, our whole history there disappears over here in our network tab. And that's because we're actually loading a whole new web page. So like the browser doesn't really maintain a context saying, oh, this is the same site as the other site, so I only need to change one or two things. It just says, go fetch all of that, render it all. It's a whole new website. That's part of the stateless aspect, the traditionally stateless aspect of HTTP and HTML is it doesn't maintain a state as you navigate around. But that's changed a lot when we talk about things like single page applications, like what we've been working on with React, for example, because instead of each interaction that you take, loading up a whole new web page every time. So if this is an example of a React router. I'm just going to pull up DevTools over here, so we should be able to see if it'll show me. Let me see. Oh yeah, that'll work. So we're just going to see here on the network tab. What we should see is I don't have this preserve log checked, but we're not even actually making requests and loading whole new pages, right? And that's because all of this routing in this case is being handled inside of the JavaScript side of the code. And we've been doing stuff like that, but we just haven't actually changed. So one of the challenges with these single page applications that we've been building, right, where we've got our stopwatch or a to-do app or anything like that, these ones don't have a lot of different types of pages that you can go to, but a lot of modern applications do have a lot of different pages you can go to. They're still written in JavaScript to load those different things. So the challenge that's cropped up as a result of that is how do we maintain this useful history, routing history, so you can still go backwards and forwards so that your URL represents where you're at, so that you can refresh your page and get the same state that you're in right then, while you're doing all of that in JavaScript instead of actually making requests back to the server. So that's one of the unique challenges that came about when a lot of these applications started moving to these single page or very heavy JavaScript Ajax type applications, is now we've got a routing problem where how do we represent that state? How do we update these values up there? Now, does the way routing sort of works for a server make sense? You're just requesting something different each time. Yeah, it shouldn't be that bad. So the question is, how do we solve that for a JavaScript application? What do we do? And wow, it's going a lot faster than I thought. So we may be finished early. I do at the end of this want to ask if there's any topics people want to cover in remaining classes or whatever. It can be fun things or whatever, just so we can make sure in the last 2 classes next week, if people even feel like we need them, we cover stuff that people are really interested in. But digging more into this, what happened is, realizing that this was a problem, there was a whole set of tools that are sort of built into the browser nowadays as part of the browser APIs and capabilities sort of tacked onto JavaScript, which is this whole history API capability. And this allows you to access all of this routing information, more or less, location, which we'll also take a look at. These 2 pieces of information combined allow you to both access your routing information and allow you to manipulate it directly from JavaScript so that you can still maintain that sort of value. So if we go back, we'll look at the Space Jam site. We'll pull up the side here, because even though it's an old site, it's running on modern Chrome, so we have access to all of the new JavaScript capabilities, all of the new DOM capabilities here. So let's take a look at what's going on. I'm going to do a full refresh so we have something cleaned up here. And I'm telling, by the way, I told my dev tools here to preserve the log so that we'll see for the console what's going on. So we can look at the history right now and see a little bit about what's going on. It's saying there's stuff in the history. So even though I did a refresh, it sees stuff in the past, stuff in the future, but we can't really see. I mean, yeah, I've got an object here, but it didn't tell me where I'm at right now. So before we even get into the history bit, even before that, there's been the ability to get your current location using this document object model. So document.location is the big broad way to do it. You can get all the information about the page that you're on. But you can see we get these different portions of our route here. And so that last bit that I was talking about, which I couldn't remember the name of earlier, after the slash, that's usually known as the path. So on this document.location object, yeah, we could get the whole location if we want. But like the whole href, so that's that whole page that we're at. But we can also look at just document.location.pathname, which shows us just this last portion here, for example. So once we sort of combine this with this history API, then we're going to be able to manage this navigation ourselves. And what I want to do here is build out something very basic to show some very, very simple routing doing something like that. Are there any questions on this right now? So now I navigated forward. So now we can use the history API. And it's got a few simple commands that are easy to work with. I can navigate from my console here. So I just can go back.
This is plain JavaScript. You can just hook that up to a button on the page.
You can.
Like to say go back.
Yeah.
For a visitor.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah. Sometimes some of this stuff,
Sure you
there's some
nuance to it.
Yeah, there's some nuance on some of it where there's restrictions on when you can and can't do that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, I don't know the exact context of all of this, but for some of these, like if your JavaScript loaded from another site from the main site, so like you're a third-party bit of JavaScript, sometimes you don't have access to some of these APIs, and that's intentional so that you can't hijack behavior and mess with something.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the case for this one in particular. I really haven't worked down at this level a lot directly, so I don't know all of the restrictions on the history. But you can also just change it to whatever you want to be. So another one is Go. And Go is more generic. Really, forward and back could be thought of as specific instances of Go. So Go, you can tell it how far back you want to go. Like, let's go back 4 pages. And up.
Oh,
So I can do 4 pages. It should launch me back to here. So it's got a lot of capabilities sort of built in there. And then so that's great. We can navigate, but we're still missing the capability to tell our user when something has changed, like update our path in some way. So the other bits that it also has, along with forward and back, is got the ability to push a state or replace a state in your history. So I'll use a push state first, and they do theirs probably a little different than I would write this out. This is we're on foo state object. I don't fully understand this push. Just a minute. I'm going to look at this real fast. Dig into it a hair more. Come on. Oh, you're not going to give me a different page? All right. Oh, that just jumped me down there. All right. So I'll try and use this. We'll see if I screw something up. But history.push state. So it says here's our history object. So I'm just going to say, I'm guessing it's something like this is what they were trying to get at, but I don't know. Oops. Use the same quotes. Step backwards and forwards here a little bit. All right. I'll just call this. And I'm going to say that the route for this is, I'm not even going to call this bar. I'm going to call this let's see. And if you notice,
yeah.
our route changed up there.
Yeah.
So we just changed our route, but because this pushed, let's see if this works the way I would expect. Because that pushed, right, it added something to the end of our history. Then when I went back to this same page. But nothing changed in terms of where we were at because I don't know the exact approach that you managed to get stuff to move around, but we're just essentially pushing a state. I think this is just bits of information for it to keep. I don't think that actually even matters, I'm guessing. Let me try this and see what happens. I'm going to go with a very basic object. Yeah, I think that's extra object information as part of your history that I'm adding in there. We have that. We also have the alternative, which is replace state. So let's say that the syntax is the same. Now, what do you think is going to happen when we do history.back?
And are we the same, like the replace, change it completely?
What's that?
And when you hit back, let them change the gem too.
So that navigates us back to whatever page we were on before that. And if I do history forward, what do you think the URL is going to look like? Can you guess?
Can I go back before the jam too?
It goes back to Jam2, which of course doesn't work
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't exist, because I'm mucking with somebody else's site here, right? And it tried to load that. Because what happened was we literally replaced in history that URL. So we said, whatever our current point is, we're replacing it with something different. We want it to be something different.
When you did that, it didn't seem to refresh
It
trigger
didn't.
anything
Exactly.
in the browser.
Yes. Good point.
Just in the history object.
No, it's a good observation. So any of those changes to your history like that aren't an actual navigation are not going to trigger your state change in your browser. It's not going to reload the page or necessarily send off the request for it. It's just going to change your history object directly. Whereas, back and forward and stuff, those are making an actual request. It's reloading that page. So no, that's a really good observation. So again, like for these older websites, I wouldn't say older, any website that's really using server routing for most of its stuff, it's really easy to manage this routing conceptually on the front end because the server is the thing that handles it, right? You don't have to really manage what's going on with your URL. But we'll switch over to this. This is doing the same sort of thing. You can see it putting a route up here of some kind. But this is all client side. So this is all a little bit of JavaScript here that's managing, changing these routes around as you navigate around. And that's what in any application you need to be able to manage if you want to have that functionality. And the reason that this stuff is important is I already touched on a couple of them is you want somebody to be able to come back to that state in your application with that view, right? Oh, I want somebody to be able to come back and see the same thing. They don't always have to start at the beginning and click to navigate there. Because if you didn't have some sort of route that they could use, then they're not going to be able to do that. They're always going to have to start at the beginning of the application. You want them to be able to go forward and back and navigate within your application as opposed to it navigating outside of your application. So I don't know if anybody's ever encountered this as a problem where some of these single page apps or modern web apps, you're on the site and you're navigating around doing things and then you hit back. And instead of it taking you back in action in your thing, it's like a whole different site. You're like, I didn't want to leave this site. I wanted to stay on here. That's because they're not changing your history. So when you click back in the browser, it's not just loading that stuff from your page. It's actually making a full request back to the server to go fetch everything. So that's what we're going to try and build out here. I've got something very simple. I took a Create React app and I ripped out all the code, literally all of it. And we're going to try and build something like this, but using these very basic browser level routing capabilities first. And then after that, we'll touch a little bit on maybe this React router, although I'm not going to go into too much detail on it because I think the more important aspect of this is understanding the concept. Every routing tool that I've ever used on stuff is so different that it's not worth necessarily teaching one. It's much more important for routing to understand what you're trying to do and then learn how to use whatever tool you're using for the routing, right? And we've talked about some very basic routing so far, but there's also much more advanced routing because we're only using very static stuff, which is like, oh, you always go to this same site. But there's also routing, like you could think of Twitter or Gmail or something, right? Was going to have routing. Let me. Oh man, let me see if I can find a good. I'm sure I can find something here that will. GitHub probably works, I'm guessing. So might not be the best example. You're just not going to see numbers very easily. So a lot of routes need to be very flexible, right? They can't hard code in. I guess GitHub is probably a good example, but they can't hard code in every possible route when you need stuff to be able to vary. So actually, I will do Twitter, even though it'll be very simple. Let's just do this real fast so that I don't think that there's anything on there, but there's no history or anything. So Twitter, you've got a very basic homepage, right? But a very simple route for anything on Twitter is just being able to go to somebody's Twitter page, right? npm.js. So that's a route. This is your path portion. But they can't have a huge table hard-coded of every single Twitter user's name on there. So instead, that's a variable in the route. That can vary. And you can set that to whatever sort of variable you want it to be. And then another example would be, well, now that we've got a couple variables within this route. We've got the user, then status here is static, and then their post number, this number here, is variable. So routing can get a lot more, this is still pretty trivial routing for the most part. It can get very, very complex. But what we're going to tackle is sort of the basics of it and just use that to introduce how to do some of this stuff in a front-end application. So let's see here. I assume what I have here is this, again, completely trivial, home. That's literally all our page shows right now. So let's make this a group thing here. I'm going to some different routes that we want to have for our application. Now, traditionally, you designate home with a slash to say that's your home route. And we're going to make these more complex in a minute. But what are some other routes that we want to add to our very simple app? Just some text, some words, something. About. All right. And I'm putting these slashes in here just so that it mirrors that path name bit. Different routing, different libraries will either have those or not have those at the beginning. But contact. All right, let's have a contact. Let's do at least one more. Home. We'll have an actual home to go with our home here. I'm going to do it. All right. So if we've got these different routes, let's do something. I'm going to start making this a little more complicated. Not too much, though, but I'm going to move this down a little bit. Let's just define what we want for our content for each one of these. It'll be very simple. So contact, and it'll be a string, or it could be a bit of HTML. I don't care. We're just going to enter HTML it probably, so we can be whatever we want. Let's just make something up for our, or about. Let's do about. We'll do it in order here. What do we want on our about page? Filling out something really, really simple here. I don't know. I think this will work. We're going to see if this works. Yeah, we're just going to go with that. I think that's an element. All right, our contact page. What do we put? We're going to create an unordered list. We're going to have items on here. List item, in my list item. I don't know if this is going to work. We're going to find out. Let's see. First contact is. You
just put check out my Facebook page.
Twitter. Like at. Is that my username on Twitter?
I write Stanford meetings.
Twitter? What's my handle here? Oh, JT's here. Somebody else had my handle already. Very disappointed.
Rip.
My name. Like, all right, and then let's have I don't think I have an Instagram account. I do have an Instagram account. Ooh, I do have a YouTube account. That's probably just my, I'll just do my email, right? So, you know, my email or whatever, right? Yeah, I'm just creating something very simple. All right, and then let's do, well, we already have home up there. I made it very trivial, home. All right, so we've got some, something to load on each page, something very simple, and we've got some sort of route concept. We're gonna be putting this together. I really don't know what I'm doing here because I haven't built something like this before. I mean, I do. I have an idea of where I want to go, but do you guys, anybody want to suggest a next step forward to try and build something like this? We're basically building something very, very simple here, but I'm just doing it to keep the focus on routing and out of some of the other more complex stuff.
We have to connect them all. We need to connect to each other and all that.
We need to connect them. We need to, so what do we need to do?
So we need to connect about to contact, contact to about, home to contact and about, and then like, that they all need to be connected to each other. So you need to-
I see what you're saying. Something like, you're saying the way that like this has like
Yeah,
links
that.
on stuff. All right, so let's do that. I'm gonna make something here. I'm just gonna make a links object up here, or you know what? I'm gonna do something a little different actually. I'm gonna hard code that in. So I'm gonna go right into this index.html here. I'm gonna do like a header. I'm gonna do a link, and we'll just have this. Let's see here. Fine. Home. Make another one. What's that other routes? About. Right. This is just some raw HTML. Let's see if this is working right now. I don't know if it is. Hey, we've got some links going on here. It's not doing anything.
At least it's there though.
What?
So at least it's there though.
At least it's there, yeah. And I put it there just because I'm lazy and I didn't want to have to re-render it in multiple places. Because what I'm going to do is hook up what we changed to this div, so that this stuff will just stay the same all the time. And then we'll just show that. I'll do this too. All right, so if we got some sort of links here, we can click them. We saw that. Loads these paths. Any clue what we should do next? It's okay if you're like, I'm completely stumped.
We're on history or going to an actual place at the beach?
Yeah, I did miss telling you guys about one thing, right? Because one question would be, like, question that you should have is, well, we need to somehow, we've had event handlers for other stuff, right? Or when we click a button, an event fires.
Mhm.
So how do we know that we're changing our route? I showed that we can look at the history, and we can look at document.location, but how do we know we're changing our route? So the bit of information we haven't got yet was there's something called on pop state event is dispatched to the window every time the active history event changes. So we've got some sort of event we can subscribe to try and deal with changing routes. So let's, like any good developer, steal some code. Oh, they've got some very basic stuff here. We'll steal something like this. just to test it first. Window dot on pop state, and gonna be lazier. I don't want to write out a whole function thing. So for now, let's just log the event and the documents dot location. Oops. Path name. Let's see what we get. Let's see what happens here. Sort of me building it out piece by piece. I don't think it's working. This might be a result of using create React app to spin this up and the way it's all going to be connected, but
Why don't you think it's working?
I don't think I was seeing my console log. That's not my log. Okay. I'm not logging what I want. That's just yelling at me about other stuff. Let me check and see if. All right, hold on. My server's still running. Everything's fine. So I think I know why, but let me double check some stuff here. So I think what's happening here is each time, I thought I would see it though then because it should still show up in my, told it to preserve the log. Maybe it just doesn't actually get a chance to run that code. So let me try this. Undefined. That stuff still didn't run. All right. You go away. Yeah. So part of what's going on here is this is actually reloading the page each time. We're not managing the navigation, right? It's not a single page app right now. These are actual reloads instead of it being managed internally in some way. That's a full-on navigation change that's occurring. So
because you don't have pages, I'm just to interrupt, but I'm confused why it looks the same and it still says home. Is that because we don't have pages, so it's reverting back to that same index file? In other words, it's just re-rendering everything that's there over and over again.
Yep.
You know, we're trying to essentially navigate away from that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we didn't give it any actual different routes. I'm going to look at another person's example that is similar to what I was throwing together just to see. Yeah. So we're gonna have to. I'm gonna have to move this stuff up a little bit, I think. My links. I think there's a different way to handle this though, but I don't. That's not what I'm looking for, really. So let me see here. I'm going to look at this other example real fast as well. So I didn't see it there, but I'm going to do something in here to manage some of this. So I'm doing stuff very bare bones here. So we'll see if this works. Let me test it because I don't tend to write stuff this low level usually. All right. Let's see, how else could I do this too? Will they have access to this? They won't have access to this, will they? Let's define them in here. All right, so I'm going to grab all of my anchor tags. And then I'm going to say, I'm going to do a little something on each one of these for each anchor. I'm going to define on-click behavior. So right now I'm just going to log it. Let's see if that works. Let me see if this works. Blow up. Again, unless my tag named at for each is not a function. Oh, because it's not an actual array. It's an array-like thing. How do I cast that to an array again? Yeah, this is where it's fun. There's a way to work with this. Let me see. Here, I'll just do it the old-fashioned way. Old-fashioned way. this up, get rid of that. Anchors at I. Let's see if this works. Oh, A is not defined. Oh, this needs to be a function anyways, doesn't it? For an event. Itself. This is going to get interesting. Ooh, you are not happy. Oh, it's not a function, that's right. I'm assigning it to something. There we go. Try that. All right, I don't know if it can work. Let's say. Click localhost, click about, click contact, click tone. All right. Looks like it's sort of working for me. Not exactly, but getting close. So we can handle something when we click them. And is my still telling me I'm navigating, right? All right, so I need to do one more thing in here. Which means I need to, I have to do more than one thing. I have to put spaces around it.
Default.
Yeah. I'm basically telling it, don't do what you should normally do. Yes, I know you're an anchor and you should navigate, but don't do what an anchor does. That's all a lie. So now you can see we still get the anchor-like behavior where it's showing us on the bottom of the screen the information, but we've told it, no, I'm going to manage what you actually do. I want to write the function that handles what happens when this gets clicked. And for the sake of cleaning this up a little bit, so it will be, I'm just going to move this down to the bottom. And I'm going to make a navigation handler event or a function handler, which will take an event. I don't think I can call it. And it's going to handle whatever happens on this. So the event has a target. So I'm going to change the way this works a little bit, where we're going to console.log target, and then prevent defaults. So the way this is getting hooked up is changing a fair bit. So I'm just going to point all of these at this exact same function, whereas before each one was getting a unique function each time. Let's see, does it work? I do not know. Hey, we're working. So we can see our target. And so we could do like ref on the target. It is going to let us hopefully just see, yep, the path if we want. So sort of building something out here, right? So now, I know this is a little busy work stuff, you can get a little lost. But the goal, forgot I had to build this portion out to replace the normal behavior. We're not still firing the hello, but that's because we're not actually changing our state right now. We're not navigating anywhere when we click those, right? If you look now, what's happening is our URL doesn't change because we told it don't do what you would normally do. Don't actually go make a request from the server to get something new. And that's really something like that is what happens with single page applications, right? It's just hidden a little more. That's a lot of what you're doing with a React type application when you maybe click around like that, is you're managing something like that usually. So the next step that we need to do, we can click things. We know what we're clicking. We can even see the href, although it is coming back with more than I wanted, but that's fine. I don't care. I think it. I was hoping it would give me just the path version of it. See if path name is going to work. I don't know if it will, but we're going to find out. No, it definitely does not work. Because we don't have just a path name on this. Oh, maybe it's not the href. Hold on. It's right on the object itself. There we go. That's our path. All right. So we're getting just the thing that we want now. So now comes the questions. Let's keep trying to build this out. What would, any guesses, any thoughts on next step here?
Push state thing, we need to do a function or something.
We can perform some action, right? Yeah, some. Well, I'm going to do one small thing before that. It's not a big thing at all, but you know, I'm assuming all this JavaScript's loaded after the page is loaded. Just to the app root location. Document.get element, and I can get by ID here, and it's called root. I'm going to hold on to that because that's what we want to be able to change. But yeah, we want to do something when we navigate, right? We want to have some way to know what to navigate to. So what we're going to do now is we're sort of going to connect these routes to what they want to render because we're missing that bit of logic. And any good, I mean, there's a lot of ways to do this. I wrote this out very, very simply, but we're going to need to change what we're storing in this routes array to accomplish that in some way. So any thoughts what to do here? Because right now, this doesn't have any information.
Maybe you get the root to it or something. I know that's how we did it in Ruby. You like get root and then you would like connect it all by like the different pages.
Right.
Pages.
You would do like let me see. I think I can pull up something that's very similar, right? So it's a lot like this type of thing where you say get. Oh, a get. Here's the route and here's what to do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we could do that. We'll do it almost more primitively, but it'll be sort of the same thing here. You know what? Heck, let's do something similar. Let's write our own little function to do that. So instead of having this hard-coded this way, instead of having routes there, let's follow a model like that. Function create route. And this is going to take the route and the content. I don't know. Just creating a function here that will be used for this stuff. And yeah, this is sort of going to step outside of what makes a good function. I'm going to break a little bit of a rule here. Well, maybe I don't have to. Let me see. I think I can make this even easier. Let routes equal. I'm going to make this an object, and then I'm going to add a method to it. Create route, which takes a route and the content. Create route equals. I have to do this a little differently. Function, which takes a route and the contents to show it that route. I could do this using the traditional syntax or whatever, but let me see here. Actually, can I make this an array? Can I add something to the end of my array here? It's going to be really weird if it works. We're going to find out. So I'm going to do this dot push. I'm just going to push an object that has a route value of whatever the route is that they passed in, and a content of the contents that they passed in. So I'm trying to just push something onto the end of my array so somebody can. So now I'm going to change the way this works a little bit. Say routes.create route. I've got one that's this, and then the content for this is home. Routes.create route may not work. I may have to change this into an object of some kind, but we're going to see. What else did we have? We had about. The content for this is what we have in the about object. And we wanted a second route to home, right? Just be the same stuff. All right, let's see if this blows things up, even just trying to run this code. This dot push is not a function. Oh, because I did it this way. Can I make it work? I could if I didn't use, if I did this as a function. Route content. This might work. Might get a little confusing as to why there's a difference there, but let's see if that works. Yeah, I think that does work now. So the reason that's confusing about why that works is an arrow function by default doesn't have the same context. It maintains its own scope. And so having assigned that to an arrow function meant that it didn't have the scope of my routes array, I think. We're going to see if this works. So now we've got some sort of routes array, and I think this is just a way to add stuff to it, which if this doesn't work, I'll write them out as separate functions and not be quite as tricky. I probably shouldn't have done something so weird here. Should have made it more straightforward about what we were doing. And let me make it more straightforward so that there's not confusion. Create route. It's just a function that what it's going to do is now it can't push to this because it doesn't know what it is. So I'm just going to push straight to routes. Routes.push, just adding something to it, right? That's what I was doing. I was just trying to keep it on that object so that I didn't have a function that referred to something outside of itself, which is a little weird. So let's assume, all right, we've got some routes. Now what we want to do is somehow match that, right? So, and I'm not going to have you guys try and do this, but routes.find. And what we can do is tell it how we want to find something. So it's going to try and find something that matches, and we pass it in a function of some kind. And it's going to return the value of the first element in the array where the predicate is true. And the predicate is our function. Let me double check the syntax on this too. It should be pretty simple. Array.find. So we're just give it a function. It gives us an element. Yeah. So this is really easy. So we get back. Let route equal. And we want to, on this element, if the element dot route is equal to the event dot target dot path name. So we're matching that path name bit with the path names that we're registering for our routes. And we want to get back that route. And then what I'm going to do instead now, just to test this out bit by bit, is just log that route. Get rid of my console log here. See if this works. And we're blowing up. Yeah, oh yeah, that's routes.create route. Oh, it's because I got rid of all that. All right, let's try it now. See how this goes. We click home. It's finding our routes, right? I mean, that's nothing too fancy. We haven't actually updated any history yet. But we're able to find them, which is great. We're able to hold a reference to them. So what should we do next? Because they're like, you're not giving us any content.
Let's change what's on the page.
Let's change what's on the page.
Yeah,
All right, we've got a reference to our app root. We've got some content. So I know most people probably won't be familiar with this because we don't work with this low-level stuff a lot of times. But since I have this app root, I can do the inner HTML for this guy, which is a reference to just all of its content. And I'm just going to assign that to what I have from my route content. Oops. So, all right, let's see what happens now. Sweet.
Yep.
We're changing our data. We got it. So we just built ourselves a very simple single page application, right? But it has the same flaw that all these single page applications have.
History.
We're not doing the history, right? So what's our next step here? We want to update our stuff, but we also want to update our history, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we learned we've got a couple options here. We can push some state to our history. And let's say I don't really care what this data is. I don't know. We can give it a title of some kind. Maybe the title is just going to be our route. I don't know. So route.route. And then yeah, because we didn't give it a better name. And then our URL is going to be, that can just be the route too. Let's see if this works. It's just that's really what we want to make it. Well, unexpected use of history. Oh, no restricted globals. No, it's yelling at me because I need to do window.history, technically. It's actually on the window object. It's yelling at me because this is a React application and it's got a whole bunch of error checking that's built in to warn about doing something I shouldn't be doing. Sweet. See that? Click that. We get that. Boom, 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 boom. All right, let's look about Navit. Now you notice we're finally getting our hello because we're popping our state off finally. So that's the way, but what's that?
That's working.
Yes.
Reverts to home in the content.
It doesn't revert to home. It's whatever it doesn't change the state.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because we have to handle that as well. That's the second part of it, right? So right now we're handling it when you click our things, we're updating
Inside
it.
the links that you made, but not the browsers back and forward.
But not the
handling
browsers
that.
back and forward. We're not handling that. Yep.
Mhm.
Because even if I did that, exactly. See, we're changing the URL, but we're not actually doing something about that. So that's what we've got to hook up to here, which is our on pop state, right? So now let's log, what do we get for our event here? What happens when we change our state? And this is sort of building something by learning. We're just learning what it does. Oh, okay. What's all of our information? This is some sort of pop state. It tells us what the path is. Let me go check the documentation over here too, because that's a lot. So I'm going to see if this pop state will help me out in this documentation a little bit. Oh, I can just check my location at that point and see. So let's try path name. And let's just see if we can reflect what we want it to show as we navigate around. So we'll refresh. Home, about, contact. All right, if we go back, we see about, we see home, about, yeah, looks right. So I'm going backwards and forwards. So we can get that information. So what do we want to do next? We want to, instead of just getting it, we want to do something. When we are popping our state, right?
Copy the same line, right? The inner HTML.
Yeah. So at this point, what?
Or I guess you could call that whole function.
Yeah,
Navigation handler.
that's what we're getting to. At this point, what we should see is, oh, wait a minute. We really want to do almost the same thing, but just a little bit different, because it's a subset of this logic, right? So what I would do is, and this is a lesson in, you know, learning how to code something like this over time, is, okay, so we're getting our path name, which is this important part. I'm just going to sort of hold on to it. Now, if I have my path name, well, it's very similar to what this element.route was over here. So from there, I can sort of take at least all of this sort of logic, but I probably don't want to push state here exactly. I'm going to pull this stuff up. All right, I don't want push state because we want it to have popped something off the state the way that it worked. We don't want to push it back on again or you'll be forever stuck in that loop. But we do want to get our route. We're going to do our routes and we're going to find for each one where the route equals our path. I'm just going to get rid of this log here, and then we want to go ahead and update our content, right? I'm going to get rid of the, well, maybe I'll put the log back here for the time being. Let's see if this works. About, contact, also home, and it looks like it is. And now, as a programmer, this is the way I really suggest that you do something like this, is don't try and remove this duplication first, because anyone coding, you're going to see the duplication, right? Oh, I've written the same thing here and here, or very close. Now you've got a pattern, and you can say, okay, well, what's the same and what's different between these two things, and what can I pull out? And what I see is I've got all of this that really looks the same, except the way that I'm referring to this bit here, right? So I might now create a function that's like, let me see, update route or something, or route. I'm just going to make it very, very simple. Route. And what does it do? It takes the path of some kind, right? Well, that means it perfectly matches this. So I'm just going to pull this up here and then call route with that path. See if that works. So refresh the whole page. This should have an auto refresh going on, so I don't think I need to do that, but all right, that looks like it's working. So now you can look here and say, okay, well, what do I need to change on this to make it match that? Well, it matches perfectly except for this bit. So here I should also be able to call route with just the event.target.path name. That's in. And I can get rid of all this, except we're going to notice we got one other issue that we're going to have as a result of that, which is this no longer makes sense. Right? So we're missing one other thing that we might need to change. But hey, that's pretty simple for us to do. Let's just, if we've matched a route here, let's return it. I'm going to change the name of this because I don't like having route.
Too many routes.
Yeah, I'm going to call it, exactly. I'm going to call this perform routing. But I'm going to say what it does is it returns a route, that object. And I think, we'll see, without too much work, we got rid of the duplication. And looks like we work. And if you did some route where you don't want to add it to your history stack, you could do that as well by doing the replace state, right? Like, oh, they made a change and I want them to be able to get back here, but I don't want it to be part of the history. That just replaces where they were at. So this is really the foundation of all of the single page application routing in some way or another. It's underneath, it's all doing something very similar to this, where the key part is it's using this sort of push state, this pop state logic to handle your routing for you and controlling what actually happens when you click these links or whatever in some way. You may have to manage that yourself, though. You may have to hook that stuff up. So this, what's going on here? And so this isn't really getting into a lot of React in this case because we're instead just looking at how you do this for a single page application, and it can vary a lot from tool to tool. So then we can take a quick glance at how to do it with like one of the most popular ones for React here, which is React Router. Surprise. It might just be popular because it got the best name.
Yeah.
And now everyone else is stuck having a worse name. So, and that gets into, yeah, there's a couple other interesting aspects of routing is it doesn't actually even have to update to your URL up here. You can update it in memory in some ways and change some stuff as well. But normally that doesn't matter. But if we look at this React router here, it's got its own structure. So you notice instead of anchor tags directly with hrefs, it's using a link component and then telling you what this link component sort of the route is at this point, right? That's that way to get around the fact that it doesn't need to necessarily hook up to the onClick because it manages itself. It gets to set up its own event handler, its own behavior. We could do that if we were building ours out with React, but I was trying to go as bare bones as we could, right? And then down here, this is all wrapped in a router component. And at the bottom of it, it's got something that's very close to what we had before. It says, here are the routes. Oh, these are just links. So this text here, don't be confused by this text, right? That's just the link for each one, or the text that shows up here. But then the route for this is it says, oh, this is route. It has to be, in this case, like it has to be this exact path or something. And then it tells you what component to load when you go to that route. So that's the way it works. And then we've got some components down here, which frankly, you know, that's not much different than our little bits of strings here. And it's just saying, oh, when you hit this route, load a component of some kind. And then topics, because like I said, we're doing the most basic form of routing. You have to do more code when you start getting more complex. So if we go to topics here, it's got some sub-routing inside of it, right? These are like topic/components, props v state. So it's another layer. But we didn't, in React Router, it's sort of nice. You don't have to define that at that top level. You can define it in topics, because since you already have a router hooked up, you can say, oh, here's my links. And this link, this is getting into some of what they do. It's like match whatever my current URL is and then add this onto the end, / rendering and stuff. And then the routing aspects down here is a little more flexible, right? Where I talked about the fact that it needs to be able to handle variables. It can't just always be static before, like on Twitter. So this is sort of the idea of saying, oh, it's a variable of some kind. So you need to be able to load a topic component, but pass in this ID thing for it. And then if you look down here, you can see all it's doing is changing the string here. So it passes in that ID, which happens to be whatever is up here, which is just what it's rendering here. So that's just because they're doing a very simple example, right? They didn't want to make it too complex, but you could change what you do for each one of those matches in a lot of different ways with some sort of variable. Again, I'm not going to get into too deep into any specific tool like this. You can really dive deep into routing capabilities, but understanding that it's something that you need to work on and you need to account for and have in your application when you're building a single page app. And unfortunately, it's not as easy as building a server-side one most of the time, because you have to deal with some more of this complexity and you have to sort of work around what the browser does built in. It's just some of those considerations you have to be able to account for. Any real questions on the routing stuff at all? No. It definitely is a little easier when you think about this Git type model from something like that, which is very close to Rails. In fact, this actually might be Rails code. I don't know. Oh no, this is another JavaScript framework that does this sort of register model for its routing. But there's, again, that gets to how there's different approaches, right? So you saw how here it's different. It's like they're part of your code, whereas this other framework does this, routes at the top and then tell it what to do with them sort of statically. And there's not one approach to managing anything like that. All right.
Have you used this one before in terms of like stuff that projects you worked on, or just curious? I can see how it's, it adds a lot of complexity when that's like a big problem you have to solve. So having a good tool,
yeah,
important.
What's really weird about the stuff that I've built out, for the most part with React at least, I find it really weird, is none of it has either needed or been able to use routing itself. And that's because, like, for the project we're working on right now, it exists inside of somebody else's website. So we can't really change the routes.
Right.
Don't touch it, right? Which poses a problem. That means
you could have your own, that like what we talked about, right? Your own forward and back within your app, but not at the.
You could, but you would be hijacking. If you can hook up to that, you could, but you would still be hijacking, the full history, right?
Gotcha.
So the challenge with that then is our stuff can't maintain state. So if somebody comes back to that page,
right,
whatever our sub app is not going to have whatever state they were in before. I don't really have, there's probably somebody who's out there who's tried to solve this. I haven't thought enough about it to try and fix that problem.
Sure.
The other major thing that we built out was this editor that we built, and that really, the routing was just get me back to the document that I'm on, as opposed to any of the sub-state on the document. We could have used routing on that one, but it's not, it's a little more rare, I would say, to use routing on something like that, where you're sort of known to be in this mutable state of something. Like, because routing then would be something like change the route when you have a modal open. And if somebody refreshes, that same modal's open. Well, a lot of times they may want to refresh because they're like, I just want to start from scratch and I don't want to be in the weird state I'm in.
Right. Yeah.
So a lot of times that's not even what they want as their behavior when they're in an editor like that. So I haven't really had to use. I've used this on some personal projects,
Mhm.
a previous version. So they've gone through a lot of iterations. Some of their earlier ones were even more confusing and a little convoluted on how they worked. This one I feel is that the newer one is much cleaner and easier to use than it used to be. But yeah,
I mean, it looks pretty straightforward. I guess. So I'm thinking about like we looked at very early on the Jeopardy example about where they pulled in
right.
like 10,000 Jeopardy questions, starting with their JSON. I remember that each one did have its own link, so it was doing something
Mm-hmm.
like this. You could, if you saw a question you liked, you could keep that link and go back to that question.
Right.
You wouldn't have to start, just go through the random questions. So I guess, does this have, it seems like we saw a little bit here, generating those links kind of like on the fly. Or is that like when it hooks up with the JSON, however many questions there are, it's going to generate that many.
So it doesn't necessarily have to generate. I mean, you can create the links like these link things,
Mhm.
which is I'm sure what it was creating.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't necessarily have to handle them with separate routes. That gets into this matching bit, like down here.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
So here they had some that were, different routes, but what it had was a bit of code here that said this will match anything that has the same URL as this, and then anything following it. So this is a very generic matcher. So it's basically saying anything that's topics / something else matches this route and then goes to this component. And then this component then at that point has to be able to deal with the different cases. So the way you might handle something like,
kind of dynamic.
yeah. So at that point, it may be that this component has access to all of the data and just renders the one bit that it needs. It could be that, or it could be that you've already rendered components for all of them, and this component just has access to all those and returns the right one. Yeah, that gets into. I mean, I think they do have a lot of really, really good documentation on their page here. Like they're talking about your path user route. So you can see about, but then these user ones are the ones where it's partially dynamic. So it's this routing knows how to handle about and company, and then even at the same level, it's like, oh, if it's something else, then it's going to be, if it's not about or company, then even at that same level, then it gets resolved by this user route. And it just pulls out what the match was and does something with that value. But that's again, that's why you could get into a ton of deep conversations about the different options for routing, and the way they're handled is different in every routing tool that I've ever encountered. And there's a lot of philosophical debates over routing should be static, routing should be completely dynamic. How do you handle these routes? There's debates over when you've got some people call it like sub routing. I don't know if they have that definition on here, where it's like, how do we handle routing not of this whole thing, but this sub portion? And is that something that we want to update just a portion of our higher up route to maintain it? So there's a lot of, you can get really complex with the way you want to handle some of that routing. And then, like I said, there's also different, and then you get into really complex bits. Like there's different ways to store it. Like this is an in-memory one as opposed to the hash version, which is a browser router or hash router, which are your standard ones. And usually you're not going to need to do that. But this would be the type of option that we would need to do if, say, we wanted to have routing for our sub app that was on somebody else's page. You wouldn't want to change the URL, so you'd have to handle your routing in memory in some way. And it could be done, but it's not probably as useful in most cases. All right. I think that's what I wanted to make sure we we got through was introducing this concept, 'cause it's another one of those core development concepts for single page apps, React, anything like that. Not that you have to, as I just talked about, you don't have to end up using it on every project that you're on, but most like standard websites, if you're building them out, will need some sort of routing. So my next thing is, are there any, so I left this pretty open, right? Like I wanted to make sure I gave people a chance to cover at least through routing and some basic data management like Redux stuff, which I know that we've got through. And yeah, I could play around with some other concepts if we want to keep going next week, or if there's topics that are interesting around React or around web stuff, we could even do some fun type discussions if you want to sort of wrap up the end of this class. If there's anything that's interesting, like, oh yeah, it would be really fun to, you know, we talked about the drag and drop stuff. That's pretty complex, but that's an example, like from being able to drag to-dos, but it's sort of complex, but it's a fun thing to do. We could go back and look at fun React integrations with other things. So like there's React Music, or there's even React stuff that controls things other than just a website. We could play around with React Native if people are interested in that, which is sort of like how you use React to build a mobile app. I'm just throwing out ideas of things that are sort of fun topics, or people are like, oh, we're just burned out, we're done, happy to be done, and we can finish a week early too. I'm fine with that. If you want to think about it, you can. And anybody watching this can message me if they've got ideas or something as well. Hopefully it's streaming. Oh, it is broadcasting still. Yay. Zero viewers. Nobody's watching this. Whatever. That interests you. I don't even know the full scope of where like React stuff is done, but there's other cool topics in that same area that we could look at as well. So yeah. Anyways, I'm gonna be done for today.